to today's event. I am Jornay Armand, and I'll be your host. We are honored to have with us two incredible guests. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, the National Book Award winning author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, and Nic Stone, the New York Times bestselling author of Dear Martin and Clean Getaway. Their newest book, How to Be a Young Anti-Racist, is a guidebook for young people looking to actively dismantle racism and build a more equitable world. It is a must read for anyone looking to make a positive impact in their communities and the world. Now, before we get started, I want to remind our teams to please have your questions ready for the Q&A portion towards the end of the event. And also have your cameras or phones ready for a selfie with today's amazing guest. Now, let the countdown begin. Thank you so much for joining us today. Without further ado, I'd love to welcome Dr. Ibram X. Kendi and Nic Stone. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hey,
So
everyone.
nice to see you both. I can tell that y'all can see that I am so excited because it is such a pleasure to have you both here. Individually, you both shared your work with us and our global audience in the past, but now you've teamed up together and you wrote this amazing book, How to Be a Young Anti-Racist. And I'm curious how this dynamic started. So let's start with you, Nic. How did you both meet?
So I read How to Be an Anti-Racist, the adult version of this book, in 2019 when it came out. And when I heard that Dr. Kendi was going to be speaking at an event that I would also be speaking at, he was going to speak Friday night and I was supposed to speak Saturday night. And so I had the publisher fly me in early so that I could meet him and like sit next to him at dinner. And it was completely with ulterior motives. Like I loved How to Be an Anti-Racist. I had listened to Stamped from the beginning and I loved that book as well. And then I had, Jason Reynolds did a young adult version of that called Stamped. So beginning of 2020, I am trying to like make my way in to his inner circle, basically. And then eventually I sent him a direct message on Instagram asking if I could do the young readers edition of How to Be an Anti-Racist, which, as you just mentioned, is called How to Be a Young Anti-Racist.
I love that. Just inspiration and motivation. And you took it upon yourself to make sure that that connection happened. And I could not be more grateful for that because I read this book with my daughters. And so I'm wondering, Dr. Kendi, why was it important for you to do a remix of How to Be an Anti-Racist for young people?
Well, first, because young people want to create equity and justice too. Young people are organizing too against racism, and young people are facing racism as well. And so to provide them with a clear guidebook to understand not only what racism is and has been in the past, but how they can be a part of the struggle to abolish it, I thought was incredibly important. And I thought it was also important that someone who is an incredible writer like Nic Stone, and who's written for young people about this topic, in creative and engaging ways to do it. And so I'm so glad we have this book.
Yes, well, you definitely are empowering young people to take action with this book. Now, Nic, you mentioned that this book, How to Be a Young Anti-Racist, has stretched you more than anything you've ever written before. So I know you've written some amazing books, but why this one? What was different about How to Be a Young Anti-Racist?
I mean, the quick and dirty answer here is that it's nonfiction, right? So I'm typically writing stories that are based in truth. They're typically based on things that I see happening in the world. But it's a completely different ballgame when I have to only tell the truth for an entire book. You can't just decide that the bad guys got to go when you're working on a nonfiction title. So working on how to be a young anti-racist, it really, I mean, it helped to kind of broaden my horizons, but it also was very difficult. Like, it was difficult grappling with some of the content that's in the book, because I know that the content is very much still happening in the world around us. So working and interacting with the content was just very different in this case than usual.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, and the way that you just like uncover Dr. Kendi as a young adult in this book is incredible. The things that he's thinking, the things that he's experiencing. But I'm wondering, Nick, can you tell us a little bit more about the content of the book and maybe what teens can expect?
So How to Be a Young Anti-Racist is the young reader's adaptation of How to Be an Anti-Racist. How to Be an Anti-Racist is Dr. Kendi's memoir of his journey from like pre-birth through, more or less where he is now, as, he's the director of a Center for Anti-Racist Research at Boston University. And he went on a very windy journey to get to where he is. So having the opportunity to take what was in that book, where he breaks down everything from, what it means to have dueling consciousnesses, where you're like aware of race and racism and you're aware of how it functions in the world, but you're also dealing with stuff that you've been taught that you don't realize is inside you. It also goes into how racism interacts with other bigotries. There's I broke the book down into 3 parts, which makes it's a non-linear trek through Dr. Kendi's life, but it's a linear journey on the path of anti-racism. And it was fun to write, like I really appreciated and still appreciate the way Dr. Kendi is able to break down how racism interacts with other bigotries, like homophobia, how it interacts with sexism, how it interacts with classism. Like, there are all of these ways that racism entangles itself with these other nasty things that we're constantly contending with as, honestly, citizens of the world, and especially of this country and of the people who live in this country. So it was good. I learned a lot, and I'm excited to take that knowledge forward.
Oh, absolutely. And one thing I really appreciate that you did was define terms. So would you mind establishing an understanding of the term anti-racist? And I'm hoping that you'll both speak to the difference between proclaiming being not racist and being anti-racist. So Dr. Kendi, I'm really curious about your thoughts.
Sure. So actually, one of the most profound differences between being anti-racist and being not racist is to be anti-racist is actually to have the courage and the ability to acknowledge when we're being racist. To be not racist is to consistently and constantly say, we are not racist, no matter what we just said, no matter what we just did. It's this unending sort of term of denial. To be anti-racist is to also recognize racial equality, meaning all of the racial groups, despite different skin colors and different cultures, are equals. So we're not judging people better or worse because they don't or do look like us or don't or do act like us. We're recognizing the diversity and really the rainbow that is humanity. To be anti-racist is also to know that if there are disparities or inequities that we see in society, or even injustices, if we see, for instance, that Black and brown people are more likely to be poorer in our community, to be anti-racist is to not think they have less because they are less. It's to recognize that there are bad rules in our society, bad policies that are actually causing certain racial groups to let's say have less, and then we're encouraging young people to be anti-racist by challenging those bad rules and replacing them with more good rules and rules that creates justice and equity for everyone.
I love that. And so focusing on those rules and policies versus people is what we're trying to get at. And so, Nic, I'm curious about your thoughts as well here.
You know, my favorite thing about anti-racism, especially the way that Dr. Kendi sets it up, is how it just it's the great equalizer, right? It's all about seeing all people from all backgrounds, from all classes, from all races, from all ethnicities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as not only equal in our differences, but also as valid in our differences. And I think it's one of those concepts that truly does have the power to change the world if we can get enough people on board with it. I'm really grateful for the ways that Dr. Kendi's work has helped us to see beyond black and white. And so young people who are watching this, when you guys are thinking about racism, I just want you to recognize that it goes beyond a person of one skin color disliking a person of another skin color, or a person of one skin color thinking that a person of another skin color is inferior. There's so much more to it. And at the bottom line is the idea that, like, all people are equal and valid and legitimate and beautiful. And there's space for us to connect with each other in a multitude of ways.
Beautifully stated. And, I think that one phrase, the great equalizer, is that point of action. And so I know in your book, you talk about standardized tests being both in the book and social media, how they become the most effective racist weapon ever devised to objectively degrade Black minds and legally exclude their bodies. So, Dr. Kendi, can you expand on what this means?
Sure. So in the United States, we have a test score gap, meaning on average, white and even Asian students are on average likely to get higher test scores than Black, Brown, and Indigenous students. And so then the question becomes why? Like, why are white and Asian kids on average getting better scores than Black, Brown, and Indigenous students? And there's only two explanations for why. Either there's something wrong with the tests, or there's something wrong with the test takers. And again, we were just talking about the different groups being equals. And so if the different groups are equals, then that means there isn't something wrong with the test takers. That means there's something wrong with the test. And unfortunately, one of the reasons why certain people get higher scores is because, for instance, they're more likely to get access to test prep, which allows them to get better scores. Or even, standardized tests were actually created by eugenicists a century ago. These were people who believed that, like, every race had a different set of genes, and there were good people and bad people, and we need to increase all the good people and get rid of all the bad people. These were the people behind the Nazi Holocaust of Jews, but somehow we're still using the tests that they created. And typically those tests end up, if you get a lower score, you get excluded from certain classes, you get excluded from certain schools, you get excluded from certain jobs, as if you're the problem, as opposed to those tests.
Very great point. And so with that being said, can you speak to the role that education plays in the fight against racism? Nic, why don't you take this? I know you work with teens pretty often. What are you seeing in that realm of how education really plays a huge role here?
Yeah, and honestly, it's my favorite thing about this wild life that I have the privilege of living is the access that I have to young people and to young minds. For me, and not just for me, I think in a very general sense, we see this shifting right now, but education should be, I should say, about acquiring information. Information is necessary for people to think, right? Dr. Kendi and I actually had a conversation while we were on tour for How to Be a Young Anti-Racist about the difference between thought and belief, right? If you're a person who is only given access to one type of information or one set of facts or ideas, all you really can do with those facts or ideas is believe them. It takes other information and alternate viewpoints. Having access to those that's what's necessary for us to actually become thinkers, to become people who can take information that doesn't necessarily match other information and synthesize it in our brains, put it together in our minds to figure out exactly what we do and do not believe. And so for me, education, and from, when it comes to my kids, the most important thing to me is that they are learning perspectives that are different than the ones that they get at home, that they're being exposed to other people. I have a similar idea when it comes to literacy. Like, to me, literacy is more than the ability to read and write. Young people, when you are learning to read and write, what you're really learning to do is to communicate. You're learning how to position yourself in the world in relation to other people. And I think that that's what education is supposed to do for our young people and for adults who decide to continue in it.
Absolutely. Create those critical thinkers. Dr. Kendi, do you want to expand on anything that Nic mentioned?
No, I agree. And actually, scholars have studied this issue and found that when students are taught how to be critical thinkers in the way Nic described, it creates almost like a force field, because it prevents them from internalizing these beliefs, these racist beliefs, that there's something wrong with that other group of people. And so I think that's why having an educational system that teaches people to critically think is also having an educational system that teaches people to be anti-racist.
I love that. And even as adults, when reading the book, you think back and go, oh my gosh, I'm a product of this as well, right? We've all experienced it. So you argue that the vast majority of people believe themselves to not be racist, even though they might support racist policies. So what do you mean by this? And what are some racist policies that we have today? So Dr. Kendi, let's start with you.
Sure. So, for instance, well, let me just first say that many people claim they are not racist. At the same time, many people can't define the term racist. So how do they know they are not something if they can't even define the term in a clear way? And so most people define it in a way that exonerates them, or that allows them to say that they're not that. That's not a definition. But to your question about policies, when, for instance, you have a policy that determines how much funding each school gets based on the property taxes of a particular local area, that creates a pretty significant inequality in funding for different schools, especially in a nation where, let's say, white people are more likely to have higher property values than Black people. That's a racist policy. Or a policy which prevents us all from having access to universal health care, or policies that basically allow people to get into highly selective colleges based on their standardized test score, which was boosted by taking a high-priced test prep course, while somebody else didn't have that access.
And so in addition to those policies, I know in How to Be a Young Anti-Racist, you really discuss that importance of acknowledging and challenging our own biases. So Nic, can you speak to this and maybe talk a little bit about why it's an essential part of the journey towards anti-racism?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say it's not only an essential part of the journey, it's the first part of the journey. I think a lot of the time when we're looking to do any kind of work involving social justice, any kind of work where we're trying to make the world better for other people, frequently there's a faltering that happens when it comes to self-work and self-care. And if you first of all, you can't pour from an empty well, right? Like if you are a bucket and your bucket is empty, you can't actually help anybody else. And it's dangerous even to try and just rush out into the world, kind of social justice, water guns blazing, ready to just wash racism away, right? Like we want to do that. However, without the necessary information, without making sure you understand the biases that you hold, because we do all have biases. It's impossible to live in a place rooted in bias and not be a person who has internalized some of those biases, right? So we have to unpack all of those things if we really want to connect well with other people. There's a chapter in How to Be a Young Anti-Racist called the 4 C's of Change Making. And those C's are cogency, which is clarity, knowing what you're saying and how you're saying it, and making sure that you're saying it in a way that's easy to understand. There's compassion, which is all about feeling with, creating space and holding that space. First of all, for yourself to feel all of your emotions, which then creates space for you to hold for other people to feel and experience their emotions. Then there's creativity, which is where you have to like
Sure. So I know we may have paused for a moment in time, and Nic is going through the 4 C's right now. Her first statement was all about looking inward before we look outward and take action. So Dr. Kendi, can you maybe provide some practical tips for teens here today on how they can be supportive and maybe actively work towards racial justice?
Sure. Well, actually, I think Nic is back if she wants to continue her thought.
Awesome.
Sorry, friends. This is what happens when you have a flight and you're doing an event from your car. So, yes, I was talking about creativity. We have to be very innovative when it comes to tackling systems that have been in place for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? Like we can't come at them the same way that hasn't worked before. So we have to be creative about it. And then collaboration, having people who believe what you believe, who are willing to work with you in order to tear some of these systems down. So we start by making sure that we're doing our part inside to knock down our own biases. And then we take the information that we've learned and we turn it out into the world, grab the people that are going to work with us, and we get to work.
Love it. Those are 4 C's we can definitely live by. So Dr. Kendi, do you have any practical tips for our teens here today on how they can be supportive and actively work towards racial justice?
Well, I would encourage those teens to think about like what are the issues you're passionate about or the injustices. What are you angry about? Like, are you upset about the death of Tyree Nichols? Are you upset that some people in your community do not have homes? Are you upset because of the lack of food some people have, or because of the poverty? Or, I think for you to think about what is it that, really makes you upset, because that's probably the issue you should work on. And there chances are organizations in your community that are actively combating or addressing that issue, and you can figure out and talk to your parents or teachers about ways in which you can potentially volunteer or even intern at that organization and be a part of change.
That's wonderful tips. Thank you so much for sharing, to just think about those things that are bothering you at the moment in time. Okay, let's switch gears before I forget. We do this in almost every show, but would you mind if we all take a selfie with you both? Does that work?
I love
Sure.
selfies, friends. I love
All right.
selfies.
Great. Also, I want to do a quick shout out and say hi to some classes that are tuning in with us right now. So, thank you all for joining us from Washington. We see some folks from Texas, and I see New York in the house. Shout out to Mrs. Brown's fifth graders in California. Now, everyone out there, we would love to see your selfie. So, let's cue some music as we get ready. All right, let's take some selfies. Nick, would you do a countdown for us?
Yes. All right. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Thank you so much for creating that moment with us. I hope everyone out there is learning a lot. We'd love to see your selfies, so please post them on Twitter by tagging at Microsoft Flip and at Penguin Class. Now, we have a few questions that have come in from our audience, so let's get to those. Let's play the first one.
Hi, my name is Daryl Lyons. Hi, my name is Cassidy Riley, and we are from Atlanta, Georgia. How can me and people in my age group navigate difficult conversations about race and racism, particularly with those who may not agree with our perspectives?
Okay, so Cassidy and Darielle from Georgia are wondering, how can young people navigate difficult conversations about race and racism, particularly with those who may not agree with their perspectives? Nick, do you mind taking this one?
Yes, Atlanta, Georgia represent. Hey. Yeah, so I mean, I always tell people the best place to start is by asking questions. When you ask other people questions, especially people who have a different viewpoint than you do, what you're doing is you're giving them the space to explain their position, which means they actually have to think about their position. So instead of coming at people kind of combatively, instead of being, you know, just the idea of coming across as like, well, I'm right and you're wrong. The best thing that we can do is create the space for other people to think about their own perspectives.
Beautiful. Let's all make a commitment to creating space. Let's roll the second video.
Hi, I'm Rachel and I am from Canada. In your experience, what are some common misconceptions about anti-racism that you hope to address through your book?
So, Dr. Kendi, Rachel from Canada is wondering, in your experience, what are some common misconceptions about anti-racism that you hope to address through your book?
I think one common misconception is the idea that anti-racism, or even talking about race and racism, is divisive. And one of the things we're trying to show is actually by not talking about inequality, then that inequality continues to actually divide us. And so what's actually divisive is not eliminating racism, right? So, and to be anti-racist, of course, is to strive to eliminate racism. And racism, of course, can be seen by all this inequality around us. So we're hoping that people see, as Nick talked about earlier, that to be anti-racist is to see everyone as equals, and that's actually an extremely unifying concept that brings us all together.
Thank you so much for explaining that, and definitely makes sense. We need to take action. Let's roll the third video.
Hi, my name is Connor. I'm from California. What role do you believe social media and online platforms can play in promoting racial justice and anti-racism?
So Connor from California is wondering, what role do you believe social media and online platforms play in promoting racial justice and anti-racism? Dr. Kendi, I'll hand this one to you.
Well, I think that unfortunately there are many, many messages that are being spread on social media that is offensive to people, that's describing particular racial groups negatively. And so I think what we can all do when we see those messages is to point them out and to say that they're wrong, and to point to racial groups as equals. And I think so that those messages can be elevated and spread on social media as opposed to hateful ones.
Good tips. Nic, anything to add?
I mean, I think it's such a good question, especially coming from a young person who, young people tend to be hyper connected. And I completely agree with what Dr. Kendi said, opposing things that you see that are negative, and also making sure to use your social media for good, because it is a way now, a very common way that we get information and we get news. The other thing that I will add is make sure you all are fact checking. So it's important when you are getting your information from social media to look and make sure that the information you are getting is accurate before spreading it.
Wonderful tips. So fact check and use digital for good. Love those two tips. So you both discussed the importance of intersectionality and recognizing that different forms of oppressions, like racism, sexism, homophobia, and how these are all interconnected. Can you speak to this on how understanding these intersections can help us create a more inclusive and equitable society? So Nic, would you mind taking this one first?
Yeah, sure. As people, none of us is, the simple answer is, as people, none of us is just one thing. Like, I am Black and I'm also a woman. I'm also queer. Like, there are a lot of components that compose my personal identity. And because of that, and because of the fact that many of those components are sources of marginalization in this country, those different areas can kind of collide and interact and make a big mess together, right? Like, as a Black woman, there are disparities between the way that I'm treated versus the way a white woman is treated. And that's something that's called, oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking.
Misogynoir.
Ibram, it's the misogynoir, but it's also it's a gender racism.
Yeah, gender racism.
Yes, gender racism. Woo, brain fart. So gender racism is when your gender and your race collide and make like a whole new set of problems for you because you have these two different identities. So there are connections like that in a multitude of areas, right? So as an individual, as a young person, sit down one day and just write down your own identity markers, the things that you know to be true about yourself or you feel to be true about yourself. Write those things down and then look and see how the world around you impacts each of those things individually, and then see how they impact those things as they connect to one another.
Wow, that's such a great activity for all of us to do. Thank you so much for that, Nic. So let's roll our fourth video.
Hi, Dr. Kendi and Mrs. Stone. I am Kyle from New York. Can you speak to the importance of self-care and resilience for the journey towards anti-racism? How can young people prioritize their own well-being while also working to social change?
So Kyle from New York is wondering, can you speak to the importance of self-care and resilience in the journey towards anti-racism? How can young people prioritize their own well-being while also working towards social change? So, Dr. Kendi, would you like to take this one?
Sure, and shout out to New York. So I think first and foremost, I'm just so happy he's asking this question because in many ways it can be difficult and uncomfortable and draining to engage in this work, to fight for social justice. Just as those of you who may play sports, right? When you get out there on the court or the field, you want to leave it all on the court. You want to leave it all on the field. It's extremely draining, especially when you have a strong competitor or team you're playing against. And so you then have to come back and make sure you're recharging and taking care of yourself and your body. It's the same thing when you're fighting for social justice. And no matter how young you are, no matter how old you are, you're still humans. You still feel, you still can be hurt. And so we have to, just as we are fighting with care for an anti-racist society, we have to treat our bodies and treat ourselves and treat ourselves with care. So we have that ability to fight on and keep on striving.
Absolutely. And Nick, do you have anything to add here?
I mean, the only thing I'll add is that like you can't truly be anti-racist if you don't love yourself. I think anti-racism is a love journey that starts with self-love and self-acceptance. This is part of the reason it's important to unpack your biases before you try to go and change the world. You know, I've interacted with a lot of young people who they don't recognize their own self-hatred. They don't recognize the way that they recognize that racism has harmed them, but they haven't gotten to a space where they have unpacked that harm and begun to heal from it, right? And I think that a lot of us feel like, okay, well, the healing happens in tearing the walls down, which, I mean, it partially does, but it's better to recognize, okay, society has told me this thing, and this thing about myself based on how I look, the body I'm in, the gender that I am. Are these things true? If they're not true, if they're negative and they're not true, how do I get myself to no longer believe them, right? Like this is a part of a self-care journey, is recognizing your own value to the world around you. So making sure that you see yourself as fully human, holding all the space you can to experience a full range of human emotions, letting your body rest when you're tired, learning how to say the word no. There are so many different pieces to self-care that are absolutely integral to anti-racism.
What beautiful advice, as anyone that is on this journey, to start with that self-love. So as we wrap up, I would love to ask you both, what message do you hope teens take away from how to be a young anti-racist? Nick, let's start with you.
The main thing I want teens to take away is that like none of this is hopeless, right? Racism isn't some big, bad, scary monster that can't be defeated. It's not, I think about as a person who has intensively studied like the civil rights movement. And I think about the fact that we're sitting here together today. Like some of you, I want you to just look around your classrooms, look at the people that you're getting to sit near, look at your teacher, look at the differences in the people sitting in this room as you. There was a point in time where that was not possible, where it was illegal even. So if we can be where we are now with one another, that means we can continue forward and we can get to a space where we're no longer viewing one another through the lens of like false inferiority or superiority. And we're not looking at each other based on lies about, what being in a certain body means. We can get there. So the message is hope. And I want you all to hold tight to it and recognize your power.
Wow. Thank you so much. And Dr. Kendi, what message do you hope our teens take away?
Well, I hope that teens take away that there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing even right about them because of the color of their skin. That even if people try to tell you that there's something wrong about people who look like you, even right about people who look like you, that I'm hoping that teens will realize that both ideas are wrong, that we're equals. And I'm hoping that teens will put less emphasis on, again, thinking that judging people and even judging themselves, and more emphasis on judging society and what's wrong with the rules in society. And realizing, as Nick said, that we can continue to figure out those bad rules and get rid of them. Because I just think the world is going to be so much more beautiful if we establish racial equality.
Wow, thank you so much. And I think that goes back to those 4 C's that Nick shared with us earlier. That's something we can all take with us. So on behalf of our global community and everyone watching today, I just want to thank you both for joining us today and sharing your powerful message, How to Be a Young Anti-Racist. It is a must read for anyone looking to make a positive change in their communities and the world. And we are so grateful to have you both with us today. So until then, we're going to say bye-bye for now, but we hope to see you again on another event in the future.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us, you all. I hope you all have an excellent weekend. Keep up the good fight.
Definitely. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, everyone. That was amazing. And now the learning and inspiration is never over. Head to aka.ms/young anti-racist to find all of the flip topics Penguin Young Readers the Penguin Young Readers team created so that your learners can reflect on all they have learned during today's event. And go to aka.ms/anti-racist to find how you can add this incredible book to your bookshelf. Also, don't miss out on new experiences. We have events every week, and on February 22nd, we will be meeting Dr. Kalisha Graves and Dominique Luster to discuss preservation of Black history. And on March 8th, we are honored and welcoming Dr. Bernice King for a tribute on her mother and her legacy. We will be celebrating Women's History Day by learning all about Mrs. Coretta Scott King. To learn more about events that will inspire and engage you and your learners, visit aka.ms/flip events. And teachers, if you love live learning experiences, your class can connect with authors, reading tutors, scientists, and other experts, and go on virtual field trips throughout the entire year through Take Lessons. Well, that's it for today. I'm your host, Jornay Armand, and on behalf of Flip, Penguin Young Readers, and our amazing guests, Dr. Kendi and Nic Stone, thank you so much for spending your precious time with us. We'll see you next time.